Hello friends, Nick here again, and welcome to the first installment of our North Central Florida Food Forest Design class. Today we're going to be starting with the site assessment. Um, Hopefully your area that you want to grow your food forest in has got some canopy trees already existing, like these oaks. If you're starting with an area that has no canopy trees yet, it's going to be many years before anything you plant gets to be 30 feet tall. And so, uh, in the meantime, you're going to be really limited in terms of having a food forest garden that fertilizes itself and has a chance at requiring almost no watering needing to be done, because that's what that canopy layer is so important for. So hopefully you've got some canopy trees. Take a look at your area and see if you've got about 10 canopy trees for every third of an acre or so, plus or minus. You need to have at least about 10 per third of an acre to get a decent amount of leaf fall and mulch coming from your trees, and a decent amount of shade on the ground. You can still garden with just understory trees and smaller plants, but just know that in north and central Florida, with that kind of a garden, it's going to be pretty hot, pretty sunny. You're going to have to bring in a lot of outside materials in terms of mulch and water. You're going to have to water a lot. But if you do have a garden with the proper canopy trees, you've got a great site to start with on having a garden that eventually you can just walk away from and ignore, and nature itself will just produce food for you and habitat. So that's the first thing to know about your site. Figure out if you've got canopy trees. Figure out the directions, north, south, east, and west. So in my garden here, I'm using my garden, by the way, just to demonstrate some of these ideas. But the purpose of this North Central Florida food forest class is to really help you assess your sites and your conditions and your wants and needs for what you want to do with your garden. Right now my camera is pointing straight towards the south. So what that means is there's shade being cast by this line of live oak trees right here. And that shade's being cast towards where I'm standing now, with the sun spending most of its time in the southern sky on the other side of those trees. So what that means for me is this whole area right in here, just to the north side of these tall trees, is relatively shady. I don't have a lot of light to work with there. If I turn it around and look more towards this direction, I've got a lot more sun to work with. I do have this one tree casting shade sort of towards my house there, but just that one tree. I do have these trees on the east side of my property, so I cast morning shade right there in that direction. And then my neighbor has some trees also. Those trees in this area. Now those are on the west. So late in the day, the setting sun begins to cast shade from those trees into this part of my garden. Seems like a lot of shade, and you need a lot of direct sunlight to grow high energy plant matter like food, but it's not too much shade. We've got a pretty good mix here of sun and shade. You want to get the shade for the moisture retention, and like I said, you need the big trees because all of these live oak leaves are going to be falling to the ground come February, and that's going to provide a lot of mulch that's going to help recycle nutrients for this garden. But you look at your directions, and depending on the size of your garden, if you do have some big trees, figure out which way is north, south, east, and west, and plant your plants accordingly. So I didn't plant any trees any closer to these big oaks than right here. And I'm standing, I don't know, maybe 40 feet at least away from those big trees. I do have this Dunstan chestnut right here, and I've got a jujube and another chestnut, and then way over there I've got a mulberry. So this line of trees, as you can see, I don't have anything to this side of these trees going back towards all these big live oaks in the back. And that's because it's too shady back in there. Doesn't mean we can't grow anything. It just means we're going to need to grow some shade tolerant stuff. Now in my case, this is also happens to be the part of my garden that's the farthest away from my house. So it's going to be the least likely place that I'm going to be able to get to water some things. So if it's shade tolerant and drought tolerant, that's a lot to ask of a plant. There's not a whole lot of plants, at least food producing plants, that fit that. So to me, it's more of a wild area where I let nature just take over, and I'm letting volunteers like these Biden's alba. I'm just letting all this grow in here, and that's good for the pollinators. But so that's what I'm doing. So take a look at your space, your area, and decide how that affects what you want to do. Now these trees all get pretty big. So starting on the south end, I'm putting some pretty big trees in here. Chestnut, jujube, chestnut, mulberry. Again, there's the mulberry. All these trees get fairly large, so they're going to cast shadow now. As they grow, they're going to cast their shadow towards where I'm now standing. So I got to give that a little space. I can put some shrubs in between them like I have here. Wax myrtles and beauty berries. I've got some shrubs in here. There's bee balm, and there's a salt bush in there. But as far as the next line of trees, I need to continue on this direction. So I've got a jujube here that's got a little bit of space between it and the bigger trees over there. But if I step it on back some more towards the south, towards the north, now I've got another mulberry, and I've got these figs and a plum, some pineapple guava, there and there, and there's another mulberry back in there. So I've got some more trees, but they're not going to be in the shadow of that first line of trees over there. Okay, and so I can keep bringing that back. Now I've got a spot where I know I wanted to grow some blackberries. So I planted some blackberries here, and I planted some blackberries here, and a loquat over here. And I don't have anything to the south of any of these plants that's going to grow big enough to shade that too much. So they're going to get sun. So you can see what I'm getting at here is you need to know your directions, because you need to know where your sun's going to be. You can observe your site and see that. So this helps with your selection, your site selection for each of your plants. And these are Mysore raspberries. They're just to the north of this plum tree, which generally doesn't get really big. It'll always be an understory tree. And of course these blackberries are low. They don't get real tall. So you can see what I'm getting at here. Now I've got a loquat right here. Now they get pretty big. So that's going to cast a shadow back this direction. So eventually my greenhouse will get shaded pretty good by that. And it's already shaded by my neighbor's oak tree to the west. But it's always going to get morning sun, because looking back towards the east, I've got a lot of sky there. That's going to give my greenhouse some sun. So yeah, you need to look at your directions so you can decide where to put your plants based on where they're going to get the sun that they need. Now, each and every plant has its own requirements for how much sun they need. Generally speaking, a lot of food producing plants need a lot of direct sunlight, many hours per day of direct sunlight, but not all of them. Some of them are somewhat shade tolerant. The point is, you got to look at each plant individually. Just look it up, Chat GPT it, Google it, however you get your information. Just look up for that specific plant, how much sunlight does it need, and look at your directions to decide where to put it. Now, a lot of permaculture design courses will say the first thing you want to do is to look at your water flow and put in your swales. My experience with swales here in Florida, they're not as important for us as they are for other areas, and here's why. The purpose of a swale is to catch runoff water before it runs off of the site. We don't get any runoff water that runs off our site. Our soils are so sandy, it doesn't really seem to matter at all how hard it rains. It can rain many, many inches in one day, and I still don't see water running off. This is my fourth food forest garden that I've designed. 3 of them were in Florida, very sandy soils. 1 of them was in North Georgia, more of a clay soil. Now that one in North Georgia, I definitely did need some swales. That clay soil allowed water to run off when it rained hard. And I didn't want to lose that water, so I put in some swales to catch that water and get it to sink into the ground and help me, hydrate my soil for my trees. But here in Florida, first of all, the land is so flat. Almost everybody's yard in Florida is going to be really flat. Not all, but most. And there's just natural little undulations in the ground level here that serve as sort of accidental little swales to catch any water, but there's really not. Like right here, I'm walking into an area that's probably the lowest spot in my entire garden right here. But it's kind of a bowl. And by the way, when you develop your paths become swales in a way. You compact the soil and you walk on that, and over time they begin to actually sink down into the ground and become a little bit lower than the surrounding level. So they serve as little places where water can sink in, but the ground is compacted, so the water doesn't really trickle down into that as readily as it does the areas that are not compacted. So anyway, I think the whole swales issue, now if you have an area, even if you're in north central Florida, you might have an area where water will flow right off of your site during a heavy rain. If that's the case, by all means, learn about how to dig swales and get them in and catch that water so you don't lose it. But I've just found for all 3 of my gardens, 1 in Weeki Wachee, 1 in Chiefland, and 1 here in southern Marion County, I don't see the need to put in any swales. I really don't. All the water stays put on this site anyway. So site considerations, again, do you have canopy trees? Which direction is the sun coming from? So that you know where to put your plants where they can get the right amount of sun and or shade. Some plants need more shade. You take like Turk's cap hibiscus. That's a really nice native Florida shrub that's got some edible flowers and fruit, even the leaves. It prefers to live in the shade. A non-food plant like wild coffee, it likes a little shade. Actually, some of the tropical leafy greens, all the ones that I've mentioned in previous videos, they like to grow in a little bit of shade. So you want to know where to put your plants to catch some sun, where to cast some shadows for your shade for certain other plants. These are your considerations. Now, one thing that we do have to look at in Florida in terms of water, not so much swales, but just the runoff off of our houses. If you can catch the water with gutters and tanks, rainwater catchment, that's great. You've got that free water that you can use. In my case, I don't have gutters or anything, but what I do have is areas where the water is concentrated, a lot of water gets concentrated right here in this spot. So I've chosen to plant my water-hungry tropical plants in this area, not to mention the fact this happens to be the south side of my house, which is a little bit of a warmer microclimate than the north side of the house. So this is pretty ideal for some tropical plants. So that's why I've tried to plant a few in here. And I have previous videos on what some of those tropical plants are, and some of them are hopefully cold tolerant enough that they're sort of semi-tropical and they'll work for me. But you've got a lot of water running off the roof right there onto the patio and coming out here. So that helps with watering, because tropical plants generally need more water than the temperate plants. So site assessment. You know, another thing you can do when you're assessing a site is just look at your soil. Reach down and see what you've got. Is it white, sandy, very light colored, even yellowish, a lot of Florida sand? The sand on these paths is pretty poor. It's been compacted, and it's not very dark. It doesn't have a whole lot of organic matter in it. But if I look back into some areas where I've been mulching, it's darker. If I was to look into some of these soils down here under this mulch, it'd be very dark. But also for me, what I notice about this site, this property, when we were deciding whether or not to buy it, is that back here underneath these big oak trees, the soils are actually a lot better looking than many Florida lawns, which are just sandy and poor, don't have any organic matter. But if you get back in underneath these trees, you see that there's actually a decent amount of, this has been completely untouched by me right here, but this is better looking soil. And that's purely a result of the leaf fall from these oak trees. So that demonstrates the point of why why that canopy is so important for soil building and fertility. All that mulch that falls from the sky every spring decomposes, gives you organic matter in your soil, improves the soil. So take a look at your soil. If you see that it is already somewhat rich and dark colored with some nice humus in the soil, that's great news. That means you're a little bit ahead of the game already. If on the other hand your soil is just really plain white, yellowish like this, and poor like that with very little organic matter in it, well, that's an indication that you're going to have to bring in quite a bit more mulch to get that soil ready to grow your plants for your food forest. Okay, so that's it for today. That's one of the first things you want to look at is your site. Assess your site, observe it, see what happens from season to season, if you have time to do that. And but I can tell you, in Florida, what we have is a rainy season in June, July, August, and September, a relatively dry season the other 8 months of the year. Occasionally there's an exception, but overall this is your long-term trend. It gets really hot starting in April and May. April and May are the toughest 2 months for plants to get through here, because that's when you have both the heat and the dryness. By June, you certainly continue to have the heat, and the rest of the summer it's very hot. But by June, the rainy season starts, so we get the rain. So this food forest design class is specifically tailored to North Central Florida, and that's the basic climate pattern that we have here. Okay, so I'm always relieved when June comes and the regular rains start, because that means I can back off a little bit on watering things. Now, as the food forest gets older and older and the trees get bigger and cast more shade and they're dropping more mulch, and as you grow more and more chop and drop plants, we'll get into this in another installment of this class, but as you also mulch using your chop and drop plants, the requirement to water will become less and less, and the requirement actually for you to even have to worry about mulching with chop and drop will become less and less, the bigger your trees get and the more they drop their own leaves, and you get nutrient recycling going on. But just a point or two about site assessment. Look at your site, look at your directions, north, south, east, and west. Think about these considerations, and then start thinking about how you're going to set up all 7 layers of the food forest. We've discussed those 7 layers in other videos. Hopefully you've got canopy trees to work with. If you don't, you can still grow a polyculture, a food forest-like garden. But like I said, you're going to be limited on nutrient recycling and water retention without the canopy. That just means you're going to have to water more and you're going to have to mulch more. I hope that helps, and please stick with us. My intention is to continue this series as a free class on how to design and how to grow a food forest in north central Florida. So if you know anybody that's interested in doing that, and they're wondering where to start and how to go about it, that's exactly what this video series is designed to address. It's a free class for food forest ecosystem design and installation that I'm offering here with this YouTube channel. Okay, friends, y'all take care now, and happy gardening.